Okay, we're in Colossians chapter 3, guys. It's kind of nice to do this outside. We might have to do this more often, but we need to do it before it gets really, really hot. Otherwise, we'll just be miserable out here. So,
Not if you sit in the bath.
I guess so. Colossians chapter 3. So, all right, who's ever been asked to do something they didn't want to do?
Doing it this weekend.
Okay. Everything at school. What's yours, Allie?
I just don't have.
Okay. What are you doing this weekend that you don't want to do, Olivia?
My mom, because, class day and everything, and she bought me a dress, and I have to clean her car in the house.
Ah, something we don't want to do. Kelsey, you ever been asked to do anything you don't want to do?
Oh boy. Let's see. Constantly clean the house.
Constantly clean the house, okay? Well, that's very true, and a lot of kids have that issue of being asked to do chores. I had chores when I was a teenager. It's good for you. It teaches you something. Teaches you a lot of things. But we all get asked to do things we don't want to do. And let me tell you something, it only gets worse as you get older. Especially when you go into the working world. You get asked to do things all the time that you don't necessarily want to do. So in Colossians chapter 3, it talks a little bit about how we should work at things like that, how we should focus on things like that. And start reading in verse 22. It says, "Slaves, in all things obey those who are your masters on earth, not with external service as those who merely please men, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality." So the first point in this is really, it's telling you to obey your masters. Now, Paul gets a bad rap here, because people are saying, okay, well, Paul's telling slaves to obey their masters, therefore Paul must support slavery. Paul did not support slavery. The rest of Paul's writings, he is pretty vehemently against it, vehemently opposed to it. Go look at what he writes in his letter to Philemon about one of Philemon's slaves that ran away from home and that had become very important to Paul. He was not in favor of this. Also, slavery of Paul's day was different than slavery of what we think of. Slavery of Paul's day was always tied to debt. So if Kaylee borrowed $1 million from me and couldn't pay back $1 million from me in Paul's day, she would become my slave and she would have to work in my house till she paid off the $1 million. That's how slavery worked in that time. So Paul was always, when Paul refers to slavery, that's usually what he has in mind. See, slavery in that day was never intended to be eternal servitude. Now, it is humanity's darkest practice to date. It is still 100% evil, and to anyone who tells you slavery has been eliminated, they are foolish. You look outside this country and you still see it. You go to Africa and children are abducted from their homes and put into military service. That is a form of slavery. You go to China and you see the sweatshops that they lock people in and make them make Nike shoes, for example. Kevin loves his Nikes, but that's where they come from. Most of your clothes that you buy, when you look at the label and it says Pakistan, it says Kyrgyzstan, it says wherever that it was made in, a lot of times those are made by slave labor. And it's very hard to buy clothing that is not made by slave labor, especially if it comes from overseas.
So why don't we boycott it?
Can you boycott every product out there?
You could.
You could, but the reality.
Great Depression of it.
Exactly. It's a whole domino effect. Now, there's a lot of groups out there that are doing some good work in dealing with these issues. But it's humanity's darkest practice. And slavery being so prevalent in Paul's day is one of the things that really helped Christianity catch on like it did. Because a religion that talked about freedom from debt, freedom from the debt of sin, being free, would be very appealing to people who were entrenched in slavery, right? So that's one of the things that really helped it gain some momentum. Now, Paul here commands the slaves, though, to obey their masters. He's specifically referring to earthly masters. Romans 13:1 says, every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. That's Romans 13:1. So what he's saying here is they're in authority for a reason. They're in a leadership position for a reason. And it was God's will that they ended up in this leadership position. As much as I hate to admit it, and I didn't like him at least a little bit, Barack Obama winning the election in 2008 was God's will, because you don't get power without it being within God's will. It was God's will to teach America something. To tell you the truth, the lesson got lost on me. I will be the first to admit it. But there was something to that. God put him in authority for a reason. I think, this is just me thinking, I think God put him in authority for a reason to give America a wake-up call as to what direction they were heading. That's Kevin's opinion. Chalk that up as Kevin Dennis political commentary. That and $1.25 will buy you a soda up the street. So, but all authority being from God means we need to respect those who are placed in authority over us. Who's ever had a teacher that they felt like treated them unfair? I think we all had that at some point.
Y'all didn't even let him finish.
That was like,
Who's ever had a teacher is what I... Yeah, and their hands start going up. We've all had that teacher that we thought was treating us unfairly. I had several college professors that I truly believe were treating me unfairly. I had a lot of high school teachers that way too. But they're in authority over us for a reason. We're in their class for a reason. And they're using that authority, and we need to respect that authority. Because all authority comes up and comes from God. And let me tell you something. It gets worse as you get older, and the adults sitting around the table will echo this. The adults, how many times have you been working with somebody and they get promoted over you when you didn't feel they deserved it? I mean, let's just be honest. It's happened to all adults at some point or another. You know, we work very hard and we think we deserve the promotion when the other people give it to somebody else. And then all of a sudden, the person who was working in the desk beside you is now your boss. And you know their work habits. It makes it very difficult to do what they ask you to do. But we're still supposed to obey them. Because, again, God has put them in that specific authority at that time. And it goes deeper than that. Notice it said in verse 22, not with external service as those who merely please men. Now, what does he mean by external service?
New King James says not with eye service.
Eye service, okay. What does he mean?
Oh, not like having them do their work.
You're on the right track.
Having them do the work so they can pay their debt.
That's part of it. That is part of it.
Do
So
it,
you're just
do it
doing
when
it
they're
for
not
everything.
watching.
Yeah. Eunice hit it.
Do your job when they're not watching you.
so integrity.
And do your job with
Absolutely.
integrity. Do your job with earnesty. Do your job with enthusiasm, because that reflects on your Savior. That reflects on God and what He has commanded you to do. Let me get this right here. The Christian Standard Bible, which is replacing the Holman, called it people-pleasing. Don't be a people-pleaser. Come on, we all know somebody who's a people-pleaser. They'll talk one way, and then when the boss shows up, they act something completely different. Or the teacher shows up, they'll act completely different. Don't be a people-pleaser. Be genuine in your work, and be genuine in your authority. Be happy to have a job. Be happy to have something to do with your time.
And I'll say for the young people, that goes a long way on your job.
It really does.
Because the boss always knows. I mean, they may not act like they know, but they know. So, you know, they know your ethics.
Yeah. And they really do pay a close attention to what you do. They may not think they're paying close attention, but they do pay attention to it. And how you respond when somebody else has put an authority over you that you don't feel deserves it is going to go a long way down the line. And if they see, okay, well, the next promotion comes open, and they're like, well, they handled this person getting promoted very well, maybe they're going to handle this position better. And it really reflects good on you, and it'll help you in the long run. So it's a direct command that we work with sincerity of heart. That means we're being genuine. That means we have real integrity with our work, and that we take pride in what we do, and we try to do the best job possible. When I was working for KDE, the first time I ever worked, it wasn't KDE yet, it was Upper Deck Entertainment. The first time they let me work a major event, they put me under this guy, and he's my friend on Facebook, so I'm not going to say his name, but he'll know if he watches this, that I didn't like. He and I did not get along at all. We didn't get along, we didn't like to work together, and it was literally oil and water. But I decided I'm going to do my job regardless of how I feel about this guy. Then when we had the debriefing, I told his supervisor that, look, this guy and I just didn't get along, but I did everything I could to work with him. Well, he went away from the company. I stuck around. When the company reorganized, he came back, and we were equals this time, and he ended up being put in a position over me again. This was 2 years later, and he said, he said, I knew you were a good worker back then. He said, I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was a jerk. He actually physically said this to me. He said, I thought you were just one of these punk kids that we picked up locally and wasn't going to matter to anything. He said, I'm sorry for how I treated you. It was very unfair. And now he's one of my good friends. We talk on a regular basis. But doing your work... Now, let's go back and let's put it in the other perspective, though. What if I had acted like that punk kid he thought I was? What if I had opposed him on everything that he asked me to do? What if I didn't respect his authority? Would I have gotten where I was? No. Would we have gotten along? No. So really, how you have your integrity and how you put in the work, that matters in the long run. And it is a reflection on Christ, who we claim to proclaim. It's a reflection on him. So work diligently is our next point, going back to verse 23 here. Whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men. I'm getting tongue-tied here tonight for some reason. So we all have things that we don't want to do. How many of you have had to take a standardized test recently? Now, come on, Allie. I know you've had to take one. Oh, yours are probably coming up then. Next week, I'm sorry. You don't want to take it, do you?
All week.
They're no fun. Okay. What about a homework assignment that we didn't want to do?
Every day.
Leanne. We've got one. Yeah.
What about EOCs?
Oh, don't even use that word.
Yeah. We all have things that we end up having to do in life that we don't enjoy. I didn't look forward to writing my doctoral papers, and it took me 3 months to write my doctoral papers.
Wow.
But I had to do it, and I worked at it with everything I had. You see, how you work is a direct reflection on your walk with Christ. The work you do is a reflection. So you're thinking about, okay, well, I'm here for the purpose of making disciples, because that's the Great Commission. That's what we're commanded to do. We're commanded to go, teach, and make disciples. Well, if I'm in a negative mood all the time, and I'm not doing a good job with it, when am I going to have this opportunity to share Christ? And are people really going to listen to my opportunity to share Christ? Yes, Kelsey?
What if you work in a Christian place?
Just because they work in a Christian place doesn't mean that they're Christians. And doesn't mean that a non-Christian is not going to walk through the door and see you. You're thinking on the missionary field, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're on the mission field and you're doing Christian work, you're going to be ministering to primarily non-Christians.
I knew that, but if you're okay, hypothetically,
Okay.
if we're all on a mission trip, I all know you guys. Well, I'd say I just know a couple of you guys, and we have new people, and they're on a mission trip. How would you know if they're Christian?
You don't.
So do you still disciple them, even if they are Christians?
We live out our discipleship and our teaching every minute of every day. And we try to reflect Christ in everything we do so that our life will become discipleship for other people. It's not easy to do. I mean, we're all human and we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to say things we don't want to say or do things we don't want to do, like the time I called Trish Ashley on one of the mission trips, and I did push-ups for it just to be funny. But we're all going to make mistakes like that. Now, that one's a funny one. But
Well, darn.
everybody can make a mistake at some point. You know, okay, well, let's go back to the example of when we were working with Safety Steve in Cherokee. Kaylee, you remember Safety Steve, right? The old man with the beard that was helping us put the scaffolding together and everything? Okay.
I'm so tired today. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now, Safety Steve, he was very meticulous about keeping us very safe. And we had two boys who were older who thought they knew better than Safety Steve.
I feel like this
Wouldn't
is
you
where that
know?
rule come in that says you don't know better than the carpenter.
That is where that rule comes from. That is exactly where that rule comes from. And so they're over there doing something stupid on a ladder. There's no other way to describe it. They were being stupid on a ladder.
I'm having flashbacks.
Oh,
And Safety Steve goes ballistic and really lays into them. And justifiably, they were about to get themselves killed. And they come to me and they're all mad. And I said, look, he's the contractor. Work heartily. If you're going to work diligently and reflect Christ in him. Now, Safety Steve was a real dynamic Christian who shared the gospel with people. But what if he had not been? You know, what if Team Effort had hired him and he wasn't a Christian? He would have seen. So the influence of those boys, if they had got mad at him, would have been a negative influence on Christians. And the enemy likes to take that and keep it in their minds and keep bringing it to the forefront. So you've got to always be reflecting Christ in everything you do. So my thing that I hated to do was when I was working in an office in college, every Tuesday, and it was always on Tuesday, I was put in the storage room to fix the storage room because somebody had messed up the storage room. It was always disorganized when you would come in on Tuesday. So Tuesdays for me, for that particular summer, were always spent in the storage room. Cleaning out the storage room. Fixing the storage room back. And what it was I had one boss who thought it needed done one way, had another boss who thought it needed done another way,
that's
and
terrible.
another boss who thought it needed done another way. So every week they would go in on Monday and see it wasn't done the way they wanted it. So when I would come in on Tuesday, that boss would catch me at the door and say, fix this storage room back the way I wanted it.
Goodness.
Now, could I have got upset at that? Oh, yeah. And let me tell you something. A couple of times I'm sitting in there with moving stuff around, putting it back, going, but that's what kept happening. I didn't enjoy that part of my job, but I did that part of my job. I was obedient to those who had hired me. Now, the same is going to be true for those of you going on the mission camp this year. You might get handed a job that you don't want to do. It's entirely possible.
Okay, that happened to me much.
Okay?
You got me taping next to Hornets. I had to tape next to Hornets, and I let Paul do it, actually.
Okay. We get jobs we don't like sometimes, but we still have to do them. Just work heartily at it. Give a full effort and do whatever needs to be done. Adopt the mindset of, this is God's job for me right now. This is God's job for me right now, and I'm going to make him proud of my work. Do it to the best of your ability, and you're not going to fail at it.
Kevin, I think of it too, like we discussed in Sunday school Sunday. It's like submitting to your husband
Yeah.
when you don't necessarily want to. You know, really your submission is to God.
Mm-hmm.
So as a Christian, you have to keep that in mind with authority too, you know, because he tells us to do it. I mean,
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
yeah.
Verse 24 says, knowing that from the Lord, you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. So it's not that you're working without a reward. It's not that you're working thinking, I'm not going to get anything out of this. Now, there were times in my job, when I was redoing that storage room, I'm like, okay, what am I really accomplishing here? But
you got a paycheck.
yeah, I got a paycheck at the end of the week. I got the paycheck on the 15th and the 30th of every month.
That's a good way to look.
That's what I hold on to. You're gonna get a paycheck. Just do it.
You're gonna get a paycheck. So you do get earthly rewards for your work, but Christ keeps account of our heavenly rewards and the things we get in the long term. Sometimes we don't get our rewards here on earth. I think back about those kids that we had at Saltee, those little ones that were running around. We're not going to see the fruit of what we planted that week. We're just not. We'll probably never see those kids again. The kids that y'all ministered to at, where did we go? Golden Isles last year.
That was something, because especially that girl that got arrested.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of, it still bothers me, because you're like sitting there and you're like, well, you're never gonna see these kids again, so how do you know the outcome?
You don't know the outcome, but you have to have
Did
confidence
you eat a
that
bug
you
or something?
It got close.
You've got to have confidence that you've planted the seed and that your reward is heaven secured. You don't know what's going to come of that. Now, we get upset sometimes in the church when our work goes unnoticed. It's easy to get discouraged in the church when you've put a lot of work into something and nobody notices it. For example, this church app that's launching in a couple of weeks. Nobody will know the hours Peter Villano has put in on this church app. And probably nobody's going to say thank you for what happened. But he has put in the time. That's a work that he may not get an earthly reward for, but he is going to get a heavenly reward for. A lot of the background parts that happen in our churches. You know, I think about media teams. Nobody notices the media team till something goes wrong.
Yeah, how much you need
goes.
them. I mean,
Yeah.
you really do. You depend on them.
You depend on
What's
them.
up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sound equipment goes out, everybody's eyes go.
And I hit the deck.
Nobody's up there.
Chris!
Yeah.
This is Chris like,
Yeah. But
Chris.
that's a job that nobody notices. Ken
Next.
Dover's work in this church. Nobody even notices what Ken does. But he does a lot of things that keep Sunday school running and nobody ever thinks about it. Nobody knows the hours Pastor Danny puts in on his messages. Nobody notices it. All they notice is, well, he wore the same tie this week
Or
as
he
he did
didn't
last
come
week.
see me.
Yeah, he didn't come see me. That's the most common one, or most
didn't
common
visit me
critique
in the
pastors
hospital.
You
get.
don't like me anymore. You didn't go speak to me.
You know, nobody knows what's going on behind the scenes. Think about the building and grounds team. When was the last time somebody thanked
Oh,
Russell
yeah.
for cutting the grass
I
out
know.
here?
I think about stuff like that. I really do. I don't
Yeah.
ever go thank them, but I should.
You know, we don't. These are background things. These aren't the glamorous jobs that people think of. These aren't the jobs you get the rewards for. But God's keeping track of it. When we were at Northside, one of the senior ladies passed away. She was one of the founding members of the church. Must have been, I bet she was over 100 years old when she passed away. She was up there. And up until the last couple of weeks, she had always been at church. She was always there for the morning service. She got eventually where she couldn't drive at night, and of course didn't come to the evenings. And when Pastor Danny did her funeral, he made a statement. He said, you know, looking at our heavenly rewards, I want to be in line behind her because I just want to see what she's going to get. Said she prayed all the time. Said she told me one time, I've only led 3 people to the Lord in my life. He said, you know, she's going to be, but she's prayed for so many people and taught so many people, taught Sunday school so long. He said, she's going to be right next to Billy Graham on her awards. You got to look at it from those kind of perspectives. The Lord is keeping track of what you do. And He's keeping track of your positives and what you're going to get your rewards for. Don't worry about your earthly rewards. Don't worry about people noticing what you're doing. When I worked for KDE, I always wanted to be the assistant head judge, never the head judge. Head judge had to deal with a bunch of junk that Kevin didn't want to deal with. But the assistant head judge was the one really running the show. And what I used to tell Justin is, if I'm doing my job right, people don't know I'm there. And so that was the way I looked at it, and that was the type of jobs I enjoyed. There's an old song called "Thank You for Giving to the Lord." That song talks about a man who gets his rewards when he gets to heaven, but he never did anything major in his mind. But he did little things like give to missionaries. He did little things like teach Sunday school. He did all the little things. And the song says people started coming to him as far as the eye could see that had been touched by him. So to put this into perspective here, in 1888, there was a shoe salesman. He made shoes and he sold shoes, and he taught Sunday school. Okay, he taught Sunday school every week for years and years and years. And one day he leads a little boy to Christ. The little boy's name was Mordecai Ham. And you're thinking, okay, well, why is that name important? Well, Mordecai Ham went on to be a small town preacher. A small town preacher. Now, this old Sunday school teacher passed away. Mordecai Ham continued being this small town preacher. Well, one day, a very young man walked the aisle and gave his life to Christ because of a sermon that Mordecai Ham preached. That young man went on to start a revival tour. That young man went on to be known as Billy Graham.
Whoa.
Wow.
And it all came about because of a little shoe salesman teaching Sunday school. Because Mordecai Ham had said many times in his own writings that he wouldn't have come to Christ without that Sunday school shoe salesman.
Wow.
So you don't know what the impact is going to be. You don't know what that kid at VBS is going to go on to do. That little kid that you read a Bible story to in VBS, you don't know what impact that's going to have 100 years down the line. Look at what the Billy Graham Foundation is doing now. Look at what Franklin Graham is doing. And Will Graham, the grandson of Billy Graham, is set to follow in his grandpa's footsteps. I encourage you to look him up on YouTube sometime and just watch one of his sermons. He is something else. And he sounds just like his grandpa.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I know you're not wild about country music, but Randy Travis's song about the 3 wooden crosses on the side of the road, you know, with the Bible that gets given to, you know, the hooker, right?
Yes.
And then it's the guy saying the pastor held it up, that bloodstained Bible. So, you know, you never know why there was 3 instead of 4, and what that preacher giving the Bible to the hooker who read it to her child. You know, you never know what impact the little things have on someone.
Exactly.
I was thinking about a couple that I went to Rock Springs with, good friends of mine, and he was probably about your age, Kevin, at the time he got killed in a car accident. And I can remember when Preacher David preached his funeral. He was he talked about the rewards that he would get, because Preacher David said he could walk in a church many times, had walked in, and he'd be in there painting walls, you know, in the halls. He was just a young guy, kind of a handyman type, you know. He did everything for anybody. But he would go up to that church and work, and you never heard him. You know, his wife was real outgoing and friendly. He was in the background, always in the background and quiet. You know, he did so much work at that church. I'm sure everybody missed him. Everybody missed him for a long time.
Oh, yeah. There's a gentleman I think about when I think of that. He used to be the janitor of Northside Baptist Church. I think he still is, actually. But what he would do, he's a perfectionist. And every time something was going on in the building, he was there. And he was tending to little things in the building. And he would just do little projects that nobody ever knew about.
And that's so important.
They really are.
Yeah.
So just because your work isn't the big showy thing doesn't mean it's not important. And then the final part of our passage for tonight talks about the consequences, though. Verse 25 said, "For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. Remember I said God's keeping score of the good. He's also keeping score of the bad. Now, this doesn't mean that God's sitting on a cloud up there with a sledgehammer ready to hit you in the head when you do something bad.
He sends karma after you.
Thank goodness.
What you do always does get found out. And the bad things you do always do come back on you. It may not happen this side of heaven, but it does happen. But I have personally witnessed people who did evil deeds and were very bad people get what they deserved. So you've got to keep that in mind too. While we're willing to serve, when we reject, there are also consequences of it. So don't reject what God has put in front of you, whether it be big or small. The relations to the slaves didn't get lost here. Now, going right back up to what it said, where he said, slaves, obey your masters. Now, the master, if you're thinking about this, if this is being read in the church at Colossae, when the slave owner hears slaves obey all your masters, his ears are going to perk up. He's going to say, okay, but then he's going to hear this passage, for he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done. So the slave owner now is going to say, oh, wait a minute. If I do wrong things to them, I've got consequences coming too. And so the same thing with our bosses or our co-workers or our teachers or whoever's in authority over us. They've got consequences coming to them for the wrong things that they do. Our job is just to serve faithfully and to stay faithful. Those who are evil get repaid for those evil deeds. So that's really all I have for the lesson tonight. It was very short, very direct. We'll have prayer and then we'll take questions. Heavenly Father, thank you for the time together. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the wonderful weather that let us come outside tonight. Lord, we ask that you help us be faithful in our work, faithful in what you call us to do. May we take our directions from you, and may we go where you would have us to go. Whether our jobs be big, whether they're small, may we work heartily at them as you have commanded us to do. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.